Welcome to the Future of Supply Chain, presented by Dynamo. Each episode, we sit down with leaders in the industry as we build the future of supply chain together. Let's get into the show. Here's our host, Santosh Sankar.
Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back to the Future of Supply Chain podcast. I'm your host, Santosh Sankar, and joining me today for a very special episode is my teammate, Madelyn O'Farrell. Welcome, Madelyn.
Thank you, Santosh, for having me. Excited to be here.
So we're about to share some news with the audience, but before we do, I don't think they really know you. They might have known you from a blog post. Maybe some people have taken meetings with you. But give us the Madelyn O'Farrell story that I know very well, but let the world know and understand how you got to Dynamo and why in the world you got interested in investing in supply chain of all things.
Yeah, it's a great question. It was certainly one that I was surprised to become so interested in myself. I come from an investment background, doing both fund investing and growth equity investing before this. So this is also my first foray into pre-seed and seed, the really early stages. A lot of my previous focus areas included subjects like climate tech and health tech, but was overall pretty generalist in nature. And when I was thinking about what I wanted out of my career and what I wanted as a next step, I really wanted to come to a fund that was specialized in something. And I was excited about a lot of the existing companies in the portfolio and thought of Dynamo as a great opportunity to do a bit of a deep dive on a subject that I hadn't previously given much thought about.
That's awesome. And we're grateful that you decided to continue building your career here. I'll be the first to say that. But with that, this is kind of a special moment because our audience, for how many ever years I've done this, I've lost track, has generally gotten used to hearing me week in, week out, or as of this year, kind of every other week. And for the first time, we're actually going to swap hosts, and you're going to actually play host here on the Future Supply Chain for the next, call it 5-6 episodes. But it's around a very special topic that you're leading the charge on here at Dynamo, around the intersection of AI inside of freight brokerage. So I'd love for you to kind of share kind of the depth of research that you're currently conducting and just kind of where you're at which point I'm going to hand the baton to you to host me on this podcast for the first time.
Perfect. Yeah. So this is certainly a hot topic, and we've seen a number of flavors sort of pop up in the pipeline over the last 12 months with various approaches to how to incorporate AI within a freight brokerage and sort of related fields within the supply chain. And essentially the work that I'm doing is to uncover what the right angle is. There's a number of different approaches out there. And so trying to figure out which one is going to be the winner of what we think of as sort of a once in a generation opportunity with the advent of a lot of these new technologies. So part of that research has been primary research with brokerages and carriers and shippers. I even had the opportunity to come down to Chattanooga and do a bit of shadowing and literally just watching brokers and what they do practically day to day. And then figuring out, well, how can AI really boost a lot of those workflows and serve as a tool to enhance profitability, drive top line, et cetera.
And, I will toot your horn, but you're talking about dozens of interviews that are still even underway, right? And a couple decades of institutional knowledge that sit within this firm, which also makes us perhaps a bit more inclined to walk or wade into this trend with a bit more thought. Because as a firm, folks may or may not realize we don't make competitive investments. Once we make an investment, that is our investment in a certain opportunity area, theme, or trend till kind of some kind of outcome, whether it's a successful exit or maybe it didn't work out and we're no longer encumbered, and can go out, kind of gather ourselves and place a new investment in such a topic area. But with that, I'm going to shut up, and you have a few things you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I'd love to ask you a few questions, particularly given your breadth of experience in this space. As I mentioned, we're seeing a proliferation of these different approaches and opportunities. What are some of the things that you're seeing pop up at the early stages?
Yeah, when OpenAI released their transformer, at this point, it's going to be near 2 years. If I have my timeline down right. It was interesting. I think we were nerding out more so as avid users of technology and experimenters around new novel things. But as 2003 really unfolded, it became apparent to us that we are sitting at the front end of what I think most would say is a massive new technology cycle. And perhaps the last technology cycle that we saw was either mobile computing, like the rise of the iPhone and Android, or perhaps cloud computing that probably went hand in hand with that. But we've, for the most part, been starved for nearly 20 years from anything this exciting. And so as we took a step back, the one thing that we realized was we actually had made an investment early on in our lifetime in the space because of Raft AI, based out of London. And while they're applying their technology to European freight forwarding, at the core of that very early product was actually a rudimentary transformer. And that transformer sat alongside of a lot of vision technology that was actually built in order to build a data moat, right? Being able to sift through millions of bills of lading, purchase orders, other similar documents in order to fine tune those models. And on the back of that data, there was workflow automation that to this day that effort continues, and Raft in its own right is building itself to be the category leader in that realm. But since the release of ChatGPT, 2023 coming into this year, namely, we've spoken to, gosh, man, like you're probably sitting on the front end of this, dozens and dozens. If I had to guess, 40 to 50 companies that in various ways are trying to insert AI subject matter into some part of the North American, at times European, but primarily North American trucking and logistics brokerage workflow. And this has come as point solutions. This has come in as co-pilots of various kinds, usually for data entry. We've seen models that want to go end to end and either insert them at the early days or maybe at some point as they continue to mature, insert themselves as the TMS. And so there's a lot of different flavors. And the one thing that I think as we step back and continue to think about is not one approach is really stuck out. And part of us kind of going back to first principles and you leading this research is to really figure out what is the opinion we hold and not to be biased by our prior experiences, but almost re-researching things we believe we know, because things change. Tendencies, habits, buying behaviors change. And that's where I think we're at a really exciting period where we might be able to identify what we believe to be at least the winning recipe or the baseline of a winning recipe in this area.
Excellent. Appreciate that. And what would you say does have you excited? You know, we're working on sort of this developing thesis, but what are some of the angles that you're finding most compelling?
So back in January, we held our annual meeting with our LPs. And if you remember, Madelyn, when we got into the supply chain trends portion, there was a slide that said something like, we think that technology should be drop-in. And what we effectively meant by that, let me step back and kind of unbundle it. That perspective, I think, applies both to environments that are very physical in nature, if you think about kind of the robotics elements in our portfolio, but it also applies to those aspects of our portfolio that are softer, dare I say, white collar versus blue collar, or office versus frontline work. And underpinning that is supply chain has historically never been, or categorically as a blanket, has never been kind of this early adopter in technology. And in fact, by and large, tend to not be great purchasers of technology. When you ask a supply chain institution to make a decision on what is the best technology to buy, they're like, you kind of get a whole lot of this deer in front of headlights, and consultants roll in, so on and so forth. But instead, what we found is if you almost liken it to something that is already being spent, or something that they're already spending money on, rather, or a piece of work that is currently underway, that tends to actually diffuse the, oh, we need to buy technology. We don't have a framework. We haven't done the market study. We need to go call in Accenture, so on and so forth. And so we always think about, like, what's the drop in? And so as we're kind of going about the world, the one thing that I think, maybe speaking for myself, that I'm struggling with is it feels like SaaS might be a very ill-suited way of building a business and trying to capture the value one is creating by using AI or LLMs inside of what is generally a very people-heavy, service-oriented business model. And instead, over the last year or so, kind of deconstructing the actual workflow of what a broker does, right? And you spent several hours here with Steam Logistics, who is one of the fastest growing freight brokers in the nation, as to how their people practically conduct work. And based on that, where their off ramps where they put it to a system, or maybe it's a third party group that provides them leverage and cost benefit. Are those gaps maybe where AI, like, why go give it to John Doe's company? Why can it not be an AI driven company? But how you charge for that is what's going to change. It may not be SaaS. It might be, you need the work done. This is how the work gets done. This is the unit cost, right? And that is also something that is very readily understandable by the customer. Maybe you're pricing per load, maybe it's per broker, whatever it is. There's clearly a departure from SaaS, as much as it is a substitute or a drop in Dynamo words, for something that already exists, but maybe not in a realm or a world that is AI driven or has aspirations to be AI driven.
No, absolutely. And it's a great point. In particular, we've talked a bit about this sort of customer preference to be a bit more demand driven rather than having a fixed cost on the P&L to deal with in a business that can be cyclical. And so you have that preference alongside where we're at in the freight rate cycle. And so that is likely having a compound effect.
Yeah. Well, so let's dig into that for a second, because when we step back, the reason that investors have a preference for SaaS is not because it's SaaS per se, right? It's because of predictable cash flows. And you're a student of finance. I'm a student of finance. There's a lot of them kind of in our audience. Consistent, predictable cash flows trade at a premium when you think about multiples versus those that are irregular. And so I think over the last decade, as software has permeated other industries, there's this tendency to say, how do you kind of just like jam this thing into being SaaS? And the thing that we've found being supply chain specialists is like, you kind of can't do that, because customers don't want to buy SaaS for exactly what you said. They have variable revenue lines. They don't want to kind of put a bunch of fixed costs into their P&L. But instead, how do you kind of meet halfway is what I increasingly describe as contracting, where taking the subject matter of brokerage LLMs, right? Maybe it's a unit of work. So let's say it might be something associated with track and trace. Right? Figuring out where your load is, when is it arriving, is it properly scheduled for the receiving dock? That in turn could actually be priced on the number of track and trace requests that have been done. Or maybe it's per load, because a load is the atomic unit of a freight brokerage, right? That's how people track revenue. And what we're finding is a lot of people don't know how to track expenses and gross margin on a per load basis. Shocking. Some of the largest brokers in the country cannot articulate that to us from our one-on-one calls. And so why not price it like that? All right. Hey, like track and trace as a part of a load is X dollars. And we'll bundle it. So if you have revenue visibility as to maybe this year, like you're doing, 5,000 loads, I'm making a number up to 5,000 loads, your cost is X. Above 5,000 loads, it's X plus 20%. And what that allows us to do is that allows the company, the startup rather, to get a little more predictability, but equally you're not encumbering the customer with these massive fixed costs. Instead, what they can actually do is plan around, we see this type of base load every year. We're happy to get the benefit of lower pricing by focusing on this base load of transactions. And anything above that, that's gravy, because that probably means we're growing more than we expected. And therefore, we're happy to kind of pay a little more. And at renewal, we'll just account for that, right? So maybe we jump to the next tier and our unit cost goes down again. But those are the types of things that are swirling around in my head. And a lot of them, you might point out, have nothing to do with AI, or at least not yet. We're not talking about that. It's all about business model and go-to-market.
No, definitely. And outside of sort of this pricing structure conversation we're having, what else do you see some of the key barriers to adoption, both for AI and kind of generally when you're trying to sell technology to folks like brokers?
I think it was like 2 weeks ago, you and I were on a call, and I did not expect for the person on that call to tell us that they did not have a handle on their unit costs. Like, couldn't give us a clear cost to serve per load across the 5-6 different key workflows that they identify as being crucial to a freight broker. I think that is going to cause some friction in the sales cycle, because you don't have a baseline to go prove yourself against. And you cannot say, oh, look, I'm X percent better, right? And what does better mean? Better should mean I'm driving your costs down by an order of magnitude, and you're allowing me to capture a piece of that value I create for you. Because people don't have an understanding of what's happening today or yesterday or the year before, there's going to be some friction around how do you price and contract this. But that happens, and we can work through that. So I think that's one thing. I think two, there are a lot of executives in this industry, and I've heard this from fleet operator to brokerage executive, warehousing. This is probably a more supply chain statement. A lot of people use the various AI products in their day-to-day, but they don't feel like they really understand it to make critical decisions. And so how can one inform them as to, hey, we're the people or we're the voice to turn to when you have questions around AI inside of brokerage or warehousing or whatever it is. And we're trusted, and either we can help you think through things, or we can introduce you to others who are going through the same exercise. And that's a big statement around education, right? When you have to educate a market, especially if you're positioning yourself as a technology buy, not an outcomes buy, there's going to be meaningful pushback, because in some way, shape, or form, they're already competitive efforts underway. Now, that might look more like process optimization or RPA, may not be like for like, but to a buyer, they're like, well, I have this thing that's supposed to reduce my cost by 15%. You're coming and saying you could do 25. How do I know you're the best AI? Because I'm reading these headlines in Wall Street Journal or TechCrunch, and I can't tell like for like.
No, absolutely makes sense. And I think that's a great segue to another question, which is, when we step back and reflect on all of the opportunities we've seen from AI, both in supply chain and in other sectors. VCs are trying to parse through what enables true differentiation, especially sustainable differentiation, in the 5-10 year plus timelines that we think in. What are some of the things that are top of mind for you that folks can implement to escape the competition?
This is a really, really good question. And I don't think this is on your pre-read, which I'm even more proud of. Data, right? Like we ran around like fools. I'm talking not us necessarily at Dynamo, but I do think of us as fools most days, that. But like as an investment community, investors lost their damn minds about AI, and they're still losing their minds over it. But then kind of quietly, like they'll say like, well, why is this company better than that one over there, right? And when you have a VC that is trusted one-on-one, you can have some of these maybe called vulnerable conversations. And I kind of go back to some of the early days of Dynamo, right? When we're doing our initial investments in robotics and autonomy, hell, even Raft, it was called Vector at that time. We fixated on data. Data is the thing, in my extremely humble opinion, maybe not so humble. Data is where I think these companies will thrive or die because they become commoditized. And how does somebody build a data advantage? And what does that practically look like? Because some of those things might be a Trojan horse to ultimately a massive AI play, right? How are you sitting on top of existing data sets? Are these data sets sitting in modern data lakes? Are they in Snowflake or Databricks? How can you then stream them through into some type of a model, right? If that's not the case, what smarts can you actually create around being that data interface that can then get fed into some type of an AI capability, right? And then I'd also add the third part, your process, right? What things are you doing, or what things should you do to gain an unfair data advantage that makes it very hard for somebody else to show up and replicate, right? And where have we seen this kind of in the ether on supply chain, where you have public data sets getting mashed with private data sets, where you actually have exhaustive work that is manually being done, but is being input or captured into a system of record, that over time can be used to train a model. Spoiler alert, I'm not convinced that models are where there's this massive opportunity and that's where winners and losers will be made. I actually think over time, you might, in a given subject matter, have 3 to 5 models that are viewed to be the best. But they're probably going to be at about parity when it comes to outcome, right? Like you're kind of going to kind of hit this asymptotic curve. But instead, what allows you to thrive and be better is that you have all of this unfair data. And over time, maybe your model is 0.5% better, and therefore people prefer you. Maybe you have certain adapters and interoperability capabilities that make it very easy to drop in. But then over time, what matters is there's the repeatability, the scalability, and then the cost incentive, right? Because again, this work product is consistent. It's great. It's priced very attractively because the technology is not so expensive that you're questioning, why not just throw a human at it? Because it's cost competitive.
I think that absolutely makes sense. And the other thing that I keep seeing in my research, both desktop and in primary research, is really great user interfaces that are seamless to adopt. They're not heavy lift for users. You have some form of human in the loop. So then as folks are actually using it, it becomes better over time. But that means it actually needs to be enjoyable to use from the first place. So really strong UI, UX is something else I'm hearing.
Let me ask you a question, right? Because you're a part of the workforce that is graduated or graduating in to industry, regardless of industry. And so the way your generation likes to work, prefers to interface with technology, has trust with technology, that's really important. How do you find yourself wanting to have AI in your day-to-day? What kind of workflows, interfaces do you seek?
Yeah, and I would say I'm definitely not a power user. There's ways I could definitely improve my use of AI, but some use cases that I've had thus far is writing, especially when I'm reading a lot of content, summarizing that content, and then being able to cut out just a lot of that, what I would consider more like low skill writing things. And then also on market research. So a lot of times I'm digging through Google and it's taking forever to find a particular topic. I might ask ChatGPT and it might not always have the exact answer, but it might have, oh, look at these industry publications that I wouldn't have known existed. And then I'm able to triangulate to that data or right answer in a much more efficient way.
And I think that's what is going to be interesting to see vertical by vertical, or even maybe use case by use case. Is it kind of the chat co-pilot experience that you currently articulated, or is it something else that we can't even think of or fathom at this point, which is the beauty of working with badass entrepreneurs?
I agree with that 100%. That was all the questions I had from my end. Anything else that you would highlight on this topic?
No, I think folks are hopefully in for a treat. We're getting kind of a variety of guests here to showcase their thoughts and opinions. And really, it's to kind of reveal a bit of the network that we've tapped and the research we've done around this subject area for others to benefit from, but also hopefully learn something new.
Absolutely. Well, over the next several weeks, we'll be interviewing industry leaders, entrepreneurs, AI-focused investors as well to dig a bit deeper into what, again, we think of as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And we look forward to having the folks at home join us.
Awesome. I look forward to seeing you host and listening to you rather than myself.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching. Follow us at dynamo.vc for all the latest episodes. We'll see you next time.